Have you guys ever heard anybody say that addiction is a choice? Low key saying that if people really wanted to stop, that they would?
Yeah, all the time. And as a person who's been through it, I don't believe it.
I have too. I mean, it's kind of bizarre to say.
I definitely agree. And I used to hear it a lot growing up. And for a long time, I really didn't have the words to explain why it felt so wrong. My name is Ayana, and this is
Sarah,
And I'm Abby.
welcome you to Beyond the Label, a podcast about the stigma surrounding addiction, the labels society places on people who struggle, and what it really costs when we stop seeing the human behind addiction.
you believe me if I told you that more than 51% of people in the United States over the age of 12 have used drugs at least once? Because I have. I'm part of that. I'm part of that statistic. Uh, I've battled with addiction. I've been told that, it was my fault. I chose to do it. I've come from it. I've been to prison behind it. I've battled with it in my entire life, but I'm at a point now where I'm better.
That statistic really does surprise me, even though I am included in that 51%, which really goes to show how a lot of people can be a part of a group and never know it because of how stigmatized it's become.
Yeah, I guess technically I would be too, but it's not like harsh drugs. Um, but yeah, it is actually surprising to actually think about that because I didn't think about that when we found that data when earlier. Didn't know that or think about
Yeah,
it.
so, like,
Crossed my
honestly,
mind.
like, it just started with smoking weed, I started smoking weed when I was young, like, my whole family did it, so why wouldn't I do it? It was normal, and then it just progressed, like, and then, you just wanna keep going, and kids are doing it, and you wanna be a part of that, and eventually it ends up becoming, like, life consuming. It got to the point where, like, I needed it. I had to have it in my everyday daily life.
Which is an interesting point to make because it kind of shows how addiction isn't just biological, it can be shaped through stigma and different labels. And because of that, can even prevent people from seeking help because of shame.
Yeah, and with the struggle of like how you said like you were dependent on it, you needed it, you craved it. It's like a mental strain on your brain and
So,
body
hon so
trying to get
honestly,
through
I
it.
can say that from like 2014, 2000 to 2016, I was addicted to heroin. And it took me overdosing and dying. And when I woke back up and they brought me back and I was in the hospital, I was like, I'm gonna kill it or it's gonna kill me. Like one of us have to go. And I've been clean ever since. Not everybody makes it out
Congratulations.
that way though.
Yeah.
I've lost so many friends and you know what I mean? Like friends that I thought I would have for the rest of my life.
I uh going back to what you said earlier about the 1.2 million people 5.2% of people do drugs. With that, about 1.15 million people die from drug overdoses. And that's over 1 million people since 1999. And I especially also know that my 2019, my cousin died of a drug overdose. And it was sudden, it was unknown. We knew he had done drugs in the past and that he was clean, but we never knew that he actually went back to doing them. And it was kind of like shocking about it.
It's so easy to do it and nobody know. I can honestly say there's so many times I was around family or at family events and I was probably out of my mind, but nobody knew. You know what I mean? There's so many functioning addicts that you just don't know.
You know, right I think the summer before he passed away, we were sitting at his mom's house welcoming back his nephew from the military. And we were just talking and laughing and petting the dog and everything. Like nothing else was going on where he could have probably been doing it then and wouldn't have known. I know his roommate was still a drug addict, but his roommate says that he didn't sell it to him or anything like that. And from that, I watched my aunt just deteriorate from David dying, which is my cousin, if that wasn't obvious.
And that just goes how to show how addiction and the stigma behind it radiates out into communities. It has like
A
a
trickling
ripple
effect.
effect. Mhm. It's not just the individual, it's the families, and then the communities are overwhelmed with the services that, they need to provide if they're able to provide them to those individuals, if the stigma and the labels don't cause an amount of shame that prevents them from going.
I can honestly say like treatment was never something I contemplated or even considered because I didn't have a problem. I was able to work. I was still taking care of I wasn't a mother yet, but I was a daughter, I was a sister, I was a friend. Like people didn't know. People didn't know. They just
Yeah.
I
Um,
was still and just the stigma behind it is, you're such this bad person, you're a liar, you're a cheater, you're a thief, there's so many stigmas that come behind being an addict that I can honestly say, like, until I came clean and was like, hey, like this is me and this is where I'm at and this is what's going on in my life. And I really didn't have a choice. I woke up in a hospital. I didn't know what had happened. I had no idea. I didn't know for days. And then once I finally found out and realized and, came back to grasp with reality, like my whole world changed. Everybody looked at me different.
yeah.
I
I
was treated different.
see, at least for his family, I don't think they ever treated him. I know we didn't, and we knew about it. M- We were very like accepting that he got clean and all that. So it was kind of like blindsiding even more when we found out he was using again.
Yeah, but
And those,
more often than not, like once you have that label on you, no matter what you do, I could run rampant through, the street and people are gonna be like, she's probably high,
yeah,
you know? Even if I'm not, I could just be super excited or super happy, or, I could be super tired one day and not be able to keep my eyes open. And they're automatically gonna assume it's because she's high. You never live down that.
yeah, you don't. When we went to my aunt's house after my mom, rude during the middle of class, texted me saying, "Oh, just so you know, your cousin David died." Just casually told me because my
So
family's
blatantly.
yeah, my family is horrible at doing those talks. Um, we went to my aunt's house and we all sat at the table, in her house, and she was just crying. And it was like the first time for anybody's funeral or death or anything like that, I cried before the funeral. Um, because I was watching her cry, which made me want to cry because I was watching her go through all
Like
the
a trickle
pain.
effect. Yep.
And it's also how I found out uh one time she did the drugs with him just to see what it was like. She didn't get addicted to it or whatever. She did the same thing with cigarettes with my grandma and all that. They tried them to understand why and then went on with it. She got addicted from it, but not my grandma at least. And from there, she just kept getting worse. It like affected her so much so that um, as far as I know right now, her doctor is making her go take a class to prepare her for dialysis because her body is just shutting down. She basically has killed herself since it's happened. Because not, again, as we've said before, it not only affects the person, it affects the family.
Absolutely. I think that an important part of this discussion would be to see how what we could implement or what discussions we could start having to change this. And
So
whether it be in a community level or like even, a macro level.
I believe it all just starts with, being open to, you know what I mean? The fact that people do make mistakes. We're human by nature, we're meant to mess up. We're meant to make mistakes. We're never going to be perfect. And the fact that society expects us to live in this like perfect world where, everybody's great and everybody does great and nobody does drugs or lies or steals or cheats, we're never going to be those people. So like, I just feel like there should be more talks about it, and like people should be more open to understanding and like just be less judgmental. You never know somebody's story.
I think, and I know my family probably wouldn't agree, but I think that they're in schools and like high schools or whatever, when you're like maybe a junior and senior, deep talks about it from experience from other people. Like if they can find someone who's done it and tells them their story, I think that that should happen. Because I know, like in health class, we had a paraplegic come in and tell his story about how it happened and how what his thing was preventable.
They do that for drunk driving. You'll
Yeah,
have somebody's parents come in and speak up and talk about how they lost their child due to drunk driving, or they got
or
hit by a
texting
drunk
and
driver,
driving.
and how the whole world needs to change. But there's never that for addiction. I can honestly say, like, I can get in a car with an Uber driver and he can ask me where he picked me up from. And I'm like, I'm in a halfway house. I just got out of prison. I just did 4 years, and be so open and honest to just talk about it, because at the end of the day, like, I'm not ashamed of it. It is what it is. And it's helped make me into the person I am today. Granted, I wish I could have skipped a couple steps, but I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be who I am.
But also talking about it is very beneficial for everyone else too, because it educates
I
them.
I would even go as far as to say not only just having introductions throughout education, but maybe even whole classes surrounding educating on drugs, and just so that way children, young adults are introduced to it fully. So that way they can, that if you learn about it, it's going to be harder to judge it if you're educated.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Like, I
but
can say, like, it didn't start with heroin, like I was with a guy and he liked to do he did pain pills. So I was like, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. Every now and then it's cool. We're going out, just have a little fun. And then one day I asked him, I was like, how come I never, you know what I mean? We were, I never see you, do it. And he was like, we've been doing heroin for months. And I was just so blindsided by it. But at that point, I'm already like fully in in it. There's no going back at this point, because I'm addicted to something I didn't even know I was addicted to. Something I had no I knew about it, I had heard about it, but did I ever think it would be me? Did I ever know, like, hey, this is what it looks like? No.
no, I don't even know what it looks like. I mean, I may play games like Schedule One and whatever, but like I don't know what the actual things look like except weed, because that's was around me, especially where the area I grew up in. It was common.
In conclusion, I think some good ways to help change the stigma or the way people view people who struggle with addiction are changing the ways that we speak about people who struggle with addiction. So to avoid words like addict or junkie and use terms like a person with substance use disorder. Again, just kind of piggybacking what we already said earlier, increasing education and awareness so that way people can understand the signs or resources if they happen to struggle themselves. Also, something that's really important is encouraging empathy instead of encouraging judging others. If you hear somebody talking about addiction being a choice, or if you hear somebody speaking on someone who struggles with addiction, calling them a junkie or saying derogatory things, you can encourage them to say kinder things or maybe put themselves in their shoes or try to educate themselves on the matter.
And I feel like another
Another
big thing
way,
is people need to not be afraid to speak up, talk about it, don't be afraid to tell your story.
absolutely. And then something that is hits close to home for me, being a Black woman, is media representation. A lot of times in the media, people who struggle with addiction are like side roles, or they are seen as homeless, or they're used kind of as a prop to tell a story instead of actually highlighting, you know,
The problems with it.
realistic that exactly. And I say all that to say that by reducing stigma, we can change the meanings that are attached to people with addiction, and this would improve the way that they feel about themselves, which ultimately could encourage them to get help for themselves. And instead of
Save somebody's
encouraging
life.
shame, exactly, which all ties back to symbolic interactionism, which is when the labels that people give others help define how people feel about themselves.
Yeah.
I can honestly say there's been times when I've felt pretty, low, pretty bad just because of how everybody else made me feel. It's taken a long time for me to accept myself and understand myself and, be willing to talk about it so openly and freely because it's me now and I'm okay with who I am.
Yeah. I mean, not only for drug addiction, that it's like for really anything, a label can cause so much damage to
Absolutely.
somebody. From bullying to, uh, I mean, honestly, that's the only other one that I can think of. But like, that is also that big. And I mean, sometimes even that bullying can lead to people doing drugs and all that. It's
Absolutely.
just
It
how
can stem from anywhere.
once you have that.
This podcast could become too stressful, and somebody, it could cause somebody to go get high.
Mm-hmm.
Stress comes from anywhere and anything.
Yeah. Thank you for watching Behind the Label, listening wherever you are. And if you, listening right now or watching, are currently struggling with a crisis or anything, you can text HOME to 741-741 for any crisis problems that you may have. And again, thank you for watching and listening.
Thank you.
Bye.